Hello, my name is Ron Krisha, and I am with Golden Shovel, and happy to host another webinar. And this one we'll be having Kirstie McPherson do the presentation. And today she's going to be covering 5 components to a strategy in 5 minutes. The takeaway today is that we've found that many organizations just need a quick formula to how they can put together a quick strategy to get their team moving and to be effective. And so this is a strategy we've used with a number of clients, and Kirstie's the expert on that. So Kirstie, I'm going to introduce you to the group. I'm going to turn it over to them. And to the attendees, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the chat in your dialog box. Mine's on the right-hand side of the screen, but yours should be located somewhere in there. And send a question over, and we're happy to address those. And after the presentation, we'll be sending follow-up emails to everyone with the presentation and how they can get more information. So with that, Kirstie, I'd like to introduce you to the group and take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Ron. Hello, everyone. I am Kirstie McPherson. I am the Marketing Director for Golden Shovel Agency. And so you probably already clued into the fact that this webinar is not, in fact, going to take just 5 minutes. But what we are going to do is walk through all 5 components into building a strategy. And hopefully at the end of that, it will only take you 5 minutes to compile all of that together for a strategy that you can use. So with that, we'll get started. So this entire process that I'm going to walk you through is much like what I do with a lot of our clients. So you guys kind of get an in-depth look into this. And then what will happen is at the end of everything, you'll be able to compile a strategy. I generally do about 5 to 10 of these per month. So this is a pretty common thing and a really good tool that I wanted to be able to introduce all of you to. And so throughout this, if you'll just kind of follow along, you can jot down some notes, build out your strategy, answer all the questions that I'm asking, and various things like that. And then at the end, if you have everything compiled and you would like to send it over to me, feel free to do so, and I can provide you a little bit more feedback and to be able to kind of help you finish those last few stages. So this is definitely a little bit more of a hands-on webinar than what you're probably used to. But as Ron mentioned, if you have any questions throughout, please let me know. There are going to be a few times that I'll ask you to do some more like polling options, and so be prepared to answer some of those questions. But with that, we'll kind of get going. So the first thing that I want to do is set the scene for you. So throughout this, what we want to do is we want to begin with a snapshot of the organization's current situation. So where are you at currently? What is your biggest problem, and where do you want to be? So if you'll just take a few minutes just so I know how to kind of frame some different questions around for the rest of the webinar, go ahead and take about 1 to 2 minutes and just submit what your biggest problem is currently. It could be not having enough workforce. It could be you don't have distribution lines. It could be various things like that. So just go ahead and take about 30 seconds and submit in what your community's biggest problem is with economic development currently. If you guys can do that. All right, how are we looking? Okay, if you guys want to keep submitting those throughout, feel free. But it sounds like everyone has kind of current problems when it comes to workforce, various other components like that. So nothing completely out of the ordinary there. Okay, so we're going to go to component number 1, which is the purpose and goals. Everybody has heard of SMART goals before, so and I'm sure you have done these a lot. So just jot down a couple of your SMART goals. So that means that they're measurable, attainable, specific, and then they're time oriented. So you probably already have those from some strategic planning that your organization has already done, as well as any other maybe community groups and community visioning. Maybe you have a community 2025 plan, something along those lines. The purpose is going to be very representative of what you stand for and what you're doing. So ordinarily speaking, it's an access point for businesses looking to come into the area to get information that they are needing. So, but the question here is, what do you want the outcome of those conversations to be? What is the purpose that your organization's portraying? So go ahead and put down all of those and mark those down. And I will kind of tell you that the component number one is definitely usually the more benign one out of all of these. Everybody knows what the purpose is and everybody has their goals. Those are directed to you from your boards, from the community, county commissioners, state, all of that type of stuff. So this is definitely something that you can easily just switch over and move from other documents that you have. Component number two. So this is your advantage. I can probably tell you right now that most of you are going to say location in this section, which is completely fine. Your location as a community is very, very important. But in this component, we want to state what the competitive advantages are. And so if you haven't really looked at your department or your organization as being a business and looking at what your competitive advantage is, this is the time to be able to do this. So these are the sections as far as why the audience will take action, why the target audience will take action. You don't want to have a list of about 5 to 10 things here. You only want to focus on 1, 2, maybe 3. So go ahead and take down what some of your advantage pieces are. Again, it can be location. Maybe you have a really great education system with really great training opportunities. Maybe your community college is the only one within 500 miles that offers a certain program. Maybe you have access to capital and access to financing that a lot of other communities don't have. So just take a few minutes and figure out what your advantage is, what sets you apart, and why your target industry and audience will want to come and take action in your organization. All right, component number 3, target. Everybody knows what their target audiences are, right? So if it's workforce or if it's industry, maybe perhaps it's both, which is probably likely the case. But we want to be very, very specific when it comes to your target market and your target audience. So if it's workforce, be very specific about demographics. Are you trying to attract a younger demographic, the 20 to 40 range? Are you trying to attract an older demographic? Are you trying to look at a very certain type of education spectrum? Does your community currently only have that high school education equivalent? Are you trying to attract an industry that maybe would require more engineers? So be very, very specific when it comes to workforce and what you're trying to attract when it comes to that. Most communities, they're going to probably say more of that younger workforce. So be diligent about that as well. When it comes to industry, be very specific about this as well. One of the questions that I like to ask is if you had a company moving into your backyard, so this company was going to be your exact neighbor, who would that company be? And are you able to actually name that company, or do you just have kind of a broad spectrum here? I have found that the more specific that you can be when it comes to who that ideal company is, the easier it is to be able to define the overall industry that you're trying to attract. So are you trying to attract a Boeing? Or are you trying to attract maybe a kayak manufacturer? Or maybe you're trying to attract like an Ethan Allen, whatever that looks like. Be very, very specific about the industry here and try to name that exact company that you would want to move into your backyard. So this will help kind of address things like company size, wage, generally speaking, that the companies and industries that are moving into your communities have to have a certain wage based off of livable wage and various other components to have some of those perks. So what is the wage that the companies have to pay? Is it $20, $25 an hour, 18? What does that look like? What is their industry profile? What are the types of employees that they're going to need to hire? And then the other component that a lot of people usually pass over is company culture. What kind of company culture would match well in your community? And not only that, but what kind of company would you want to have that'll help enhance your community culture? So those are just some certain things to think about there, but I really, one of the things, especially if you submit these into me, I want to see the industry and the company that you want to move into your backyard. A lot of people don't have an answer for that one. So kind of just play around with some of those ideas. Moving right along to component number 4. So this is marketing. These are all of your current activities and future activities that we're going to be used to engage with the target audience. So in this section, what you need to kind of focus on is what are the current activities that you're doing? Do you have a strong social media presence? Are you engaged with local, regional, and state media channels and potentially national media channels? How does your internal marketing look in your community? Does your community support what your economic development organization is doing? What types of marketing have or have not been done to be able to match those things? And then for future activities, these are activities that you might not have had the time or the resources to do yet. So is it having a media advertisement campaign? Is it having some PR? Is it being able to produce video? What does that look like? And so these activities and these marketing components will be used to match up with the target industries, so you can figure out which activities you need to do to move on and to be able to attract and to engage with the target audience. One of the things to think about when it comes to your marketing strategy is how are you going to be able to attract its effectiveness. So having a strong digital component with that is really important. But when it comes to each individual community, it kind of depends on what the best approach is. Is the best approach to have traditional forms of marketing, or is the best approach to have more on the digital side of marketing? And then also while realizing that sometimes the marketing components are the last sought after. So what would make the most sense to be able to engage with your target audience? And then moving right along to component number 5, this is the niche. This is the component that makes your community stand out the most. So this is beyond just having a good location. This is talking about the company, the community culture, and the overall community dynamics. So is there robust revitalization programs happening? Do you guys have really good farm to table like restaurants? Do you have farmers markets? What are all of those kind of pieces that look together like this? And so this component is going to explain how you're set aside in the marketplace. And I want to be very, very clear here that this is your opportunity to sound different than any other community. So you want to stay away from that whole chronic uniqueness approach. You don't want to be boring, and you don't want to sound like what every other community does, especially if you have a bunch of communities surrounding you. But there's no reason why a community in Nebraska should sound the exact same as a community in Idaho. So really dive into what makes your community different and what makes a potential workforce or industry want to move in there. And so address these 3 components when it comes to your niche. The product box. So this, if you read this sentence as it sounds like it's going to be the most boring sentence ever created. But the product box is bringing all of those components together like the niche, the target audience, and the advantages to be able to create that product box. So this is going to be kind of that foundation and that pillar on your marketing strategy to be able to enhance and develop it as needed. So these are going to be the hard, fast targets that are just going to exist within your company, in your community as they currently stand, and as they want to stand in the future. So keep in mind of this, that a marketing strategy and a strategy in general should be relatively fluid in its approach, because what might be the case for the community right now doesn't have to necessarily be the case in 6 months, a year, 3 years, or 5. So when you're building all these things, just keep in mind that they can be fluid and they can move depending on where your current situation is. One of my favorite topics to discuss is the elevator pitch. So imagine that you're trapped in an elevator with your exact target company. So this is the company that you could get and then feel like you could retire because you just made your career. So the company of your community's dreams. What do you say when you only have 3 floors? I can tell you that pretty much everybody I've asked, it all kind of sounds the same general way. And so it goes a little bit something like this. X community is the perfect location close to all of your distribution needs. And if we don't have it, we're close to it. This is a place where you can find employees and access to training. Not only that, but we have a great quality of life where your employees will enjoy being. So when it comes to the elevator pitch, the important thing to keep in mind here is that you don't want to sound like everybody else. I came up with that elevator pitch based off of the 20 that I have heard recently. And you want to be able to pull in those niche components and all of those other things from the 5 components that we just talked about to make a really stellar elevator pitch. Because if you're standing in an elevator with 5 other communities and they all sound the same, think about how, I mean, that potential industry isn't going to know where to move because they all sound the same. So this is probably one of the hardest components around all of that. And again, if you want to submit those to me at the end of this, I welcome that and I can help provide some feedback. But you really want to stay away from that chronic uniqueness and dive into what makes your community great and what makes your community different. So again, I would just kind of like to ask, what is your biggest challenge? So after these 5 components, do you have questions at the end of this that you're like, you know, I've never thought of what my dream company is that it's going to move into my backyard, or I haven't thought of my community as having a competitive advantage, or oh my goodness, my elevator pitch sounds exactly the same as everybody else's. So again, ask yourself what the biggest challenge is, and that's going to be what loops back and figuring out how to develop your marketing strategy in the best way. So for example, if your biggest challenge is the lack of workforce and the lack of housing, how is your marketing going to direct those initiatives? So when it comes to workforce, again, be very specific as far as who you want, and that's going to direct how you're going to talk to them. So after you write down all of these various different components, you should start seeing the gaps, and you should be able to see what the strategy is leading you to do based off of those things. Again, it's very simple, and it's a very simple process, but it should ideally lead you into seeing what those gaps are so you can start addressing those within the community. So putting it all together, so compile all of these 5 components and then complete an executive summary that kind of outlines everything that you just worked on. The document overall should only be about 2 to 3 pages, and it should only take about 5 minutes to complete after all those components are finished. Again, this is a very simple approach, so you can kind of start evaluating where the gaps are, and so you can see where you need to go from here. But these strategies can also be used when it comes to writing grants or building a community attraction campaign, whatever that looks like, because it's a very high level, so you should be able to break it down into smaller pieces that are much more targeted. So after all of this is done, this is where that 5-minute kind of piece comes together when you build out of those 5 components. Okay, so here is my email. If you have went through all of this, I know we went through it, and you probably are still writing on various different things. If you would like me to go back up into a slide, I am happy to do so. But if you would like to submit some of your questions and your 5 components to me for some more direction, I'm happy to do that, and I'm happy to be able to walk through those with you. The entire point of this webinar is to show you how simple that this really can be, because when you hear the word strategy, I'm sure everybody on your boards and in your community and even in your own office kind of rolls their eyes at, because it's one of the most grueling processes. But I recommend doing this approach even a couple times a year, just to kind of keep tabs on where you're at and where you want to go, and make sure that those visions and those targets and all of the things that you're trying to accomplish are still the same. So with that, I will open up the floor to any questions.
So Kirstie, thanks for that overview. We do have a couple questions. One question was, you've mentioned that you have done this with 20 or so communities. Do you offer the services where you would mediate this with organizations and their stakeholders?
Yes, great question. And we do that. So it is quite the fun process to be able to run as a moderator for the various different focus groups and the stakeholder groups. So those are more community planning initiatives. They can take anywhere from a day to 3 days with visits to the community, and develop a very strategic plan moving forward on what you would like to accomplish. So if you're trying to do a community rebranding, or you're trying to figure out, get like more internal stakeholder involvement, or maybe to attract a capital campaign, whatever that looks like, we can come into the community and be able to do this in a way that meets with all of your stakeholders and various different groups. And so generally how that looks is a couple larger community meetings, and then several set meetings with like education representatives, maybe the business community. So if there's a small business community group and various things like that. So yes, we do that. If you would like more information on that, please let us know, and we will be able to send you more information.
Okay, another question that we just received is, what is the difference between an elevator pitch and a value proposition positioning statement?
Good question. Okay, so the value proposition is something that you should just know off the top of your head, and that's going to be more related to your competitive advantage. So like what I talked about when it came to the product box, that's more related to the value proposition. That is primarily used for internal purposes to be able to drive the conversations. An elevator pitch is how you're going to be able to essentially trap those conversations and be able to have a hold on the target audience. So that needs to be a little bit more creative in its approach, as opposed to a value proposition. Because I'm going to step on a limb and say the value proposition is probably that kind of same humdrum, like what I was talking about. And you want to try to stay away from that chronic uniqueness approach.
Okay, another question is, it sounds like lots of engagement today, but another question is, after completing this, how do you keep this to be a living document and not something that's just handed out at a board meeting and not revisited?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so I like to say that a marketing strategy, especially one like this, should be a fluid document. You'll probably recall me saying that a little bit ago. So this is something that I would recommend that you just put on your board meeting schedule to review about every 6 months. And then, because it is such a small document by nature and it only covers those 5 documents, it's a good way for people to have just kind of those checks and balances as far as what the community competitive advantage is, where the niche is, and what the targets are. Because you might meet in 6 months and then there's a new park developed or whatever that looks like, and then the niche turns into something different. So this is also a really good way to just kind of have an overview of all of the advancements that your community has had. So you can continually add this into the document and have your advantages changing and what all of that looks like. So the best way that I can say is to make this a fluid document is to just make sure that you have it on the schedule on about every 6 months for your board to review, and even if you have community groups that you would like to get involved, that as well.
And the last question that I have, at least right now, is do you have any worksheet templates that could be used just to easily transcribe notes?
Yes, okay. So that's a really good question. If you, and we will send this out on our thank you email, but if you go to Golden Shovel, here, we'll just do it like this. If you go to Golden Shovel Agency, our website, so goldenshovelagency.com, and if you go to our news and down to our blog, you will see on the blog there's the 5 steps to strategy. So this is ideally what we just went over through here. And then if you scroll all the way down and look at the blog, at the very last piece, there is a download our guide here. And it'll go through the same things I did in this presentation. And there's also a worksheet attached to it as well. So you can kind of go through all of those things. So if you need that, again, that's go to www.goldenshovelagency.com. Go to the top menus, click news, scroll down to blog, and it'll be the first blog that you see, and you can download the guide there. But we will also make sure that you get a copy of that throughout this thank you email as well. Any other questions, Ron?
There are no more. So thank you to everyone that's attended. And Kirstie, thank you for sharing insights and your strategy document.
Yes, and again, everyone, if you have questions or if you would like me to kind of review those 5 components with you, or if you just have some other general questions such as on those community stakeholder meetings and how that all looks, please feel free to email me. My email is up on the screen, and as well as my phone number. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn. So go ahead. I look forward to connecting with all of you, and we can kind of go from there. But thank you so much for attending today. We're trying to keep our webinars down to more of a 30 minutes so you can still enjoy some of your lunch, because I know that that's during this time as well. But with that, Ron, I'll hand it back to you. And it was so nice for all of you to join us today. Ron, do you have any final closing?
I do not. Just want to remind everybody we do webinars every month, and happy to continue to put out interesting topics and give everyone the ability to get together and share ideas. So thank you once again for another good webinar.
Perfect. Have a great day, everyone.